The Cincinnati Bearcats and the city of Cincinnati are defined by its rivalries. So what new rivalries could form once the Bearcats join the Big 12?
You are Locked On Bearcats, your daily podcast on the Cincinnati Bearcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you so much for making Locked On Bearcats your first listen of every day. It is free and available wherever you listen to podcasts, including right here on YouTube. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Follow us to get an alert every time that we drop a new episode. If I said right here on YouTube, I should say if you are watching us on YouTube, you also might be listening to us free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. My name is Alex Frank, your host each and every day here on Locked On Bearcats. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Thursday, June 29th. We are, I could say 2 days, but depending on the time you are listening to this, less than 48 hours, maybe 48 hours. You might be listening. Well, actually, the audio gets posted at 3 a.m. every day. So 45 hours or less until the Bearcats are members of the Big 12. So very, very exciting times for the University of Cincinnati. Very exciting times for me as the host of Locked On Bearcats. Excuse me. And I have been thinking about this week, and I thought about it leading up to Saturday morning at midnight and when the Bearcats are in the Big 12. Rivalries that are going to be formed when the Bearcats join the Big 12. There's the rekindling of the Bearcats rivalry with West Virginia. And what's so unique about the University of Cincinnati, and I think this is the case for a lot of schools around the country, they are defined by a rivalry. Ohio State's defined by their rivalry with Michigan. Alabama and Auburn are defined by the Iron Bowl. Texas and Oklahoma are defined by the Red River. I always forget if it's shootout or showdown. I think it's the Red River Showdown. I've said shootout though, but we know the shootout that is the shootout is in Cincinnati. And the Bearcats are defined by their rivalry with Xavier. Let's be honest. That is what defines this university. They could do a whole lot in football and men's basketball. But that one day of the year where they go toe-to-toe, war, an inner-city rivalry with Xavier, and whoever wins, it is serious. And if you have not lived the rivalry, and I'm sure most of you listening to this have, but if you've lived the rivalry from my perspective as a student, as a fan, as an alum, as a daily podcast host, you understand that it runs, that it is a part of you. It is so invigorating. The week leading up to it, and I think it's kind of lost its luster a little bit over the last few years. Maybe if you're a Bearcats fan like myself, because the Bearcats haven't been very good, or at least at the level that you know them as. But let me tell you, my first 3 years when I was in school at Cincinnati, it was a big deal, man. The week leading up to the game, there could be a game the Tuesday before. And as soon as that game ended, you immediately flipped the switch. Being a part of Rally Cats, and you had Oscar Watch, you had contests throughout the week. Mick Cronin would come pass out Skyline to the fans outside Fifth Third Arena. If you have lived the rivalry like I have, you understand how important it is, not just to the team and the players, but the fans and the students. It's only one day a year. Duke, North Carolina is great, but they play twice a year. When you only play once a year, it means a whole lot more. That one day a year, I always say, there are 3 days a year in Cincinnati that we celebrate. Opening Day, Christmas, and the Crosstown Shootout. 2 of those are right around each other. And then you only have to wait, 90 days till opening day? So this rivalry defines the University of Cincinnati. And it's going to be a really cool thing when the Bearcats get to the Big 12. And the Crosstown Shootout continues. Now, the shootout this year is at Xavier, but now it's Big 12 versus Big East, the two best conferences in college basketball right now. And for the first time since 2013, the Bearcats, in terms of conference hierarchy, have the upper hand, being in the Big 12. Xavier's in the Big East, which is not considered Power 5. I think that's ludicrous, and that's where I dismiss the Power 5, because I think the Big East is a major power conference in college basketball. Heck, it just produced the national champion. So when we look at the rivalry and how it's going to be going in the Big 12 and the way Wes Miller is recruited, and I get it, he's 0-2 against Xavier, and you can point to that, and you can say that this game against Xavier this year is important for him, because if you do fall to 0-3 as a head coach, it's it takes a long time to get back to 500. Mick Cronin, despite the Bearcats beating Xavier his first year as head coach, only finished 5-8 against Xavier in his 13 seasons. 5-8. And Xavier, since 1996, the 96-97 season, have owned the rivalry. So again, this rivalry defines the university, because historically it is a basketball school. And every single, when the schedule comes out, every single day, every single year, that day is circled on your calendar, and it is different. And I say every day is just another day, but to the players on both sides and to the fans, it's not, because it means something to you, because it is your school in your city playing for bragging rights. How cool is that? And now you get to be a part of it going into the Big 12. Now, I kind of went on a tangent there. So let's talk about rivalries that could form in the Big 12 for the Bearcats. There's going to be the rivalry with West Virginia. But I really want the Bearcats to form other rivalries. I think UCF has a real good chance to be a rivalry. These two teams have played 3 of the last 4 seasons, some really close games, classic games, if you will. There was the Nip and Night game in 2019 that snapped UCF's streak. It's been a theme on the show this week. That snapped UCF's conference winning streak, I believe, at 19 games. There was the game in Orlando in 2020, which UCF, despite not having a great record, was still a very, very good offensive team. The Bearcats really did a nice job containing the offense of that game. And if you remember, they fell behind 14-3 before rallying to win 36-33. They trailed in the fourth quarter of that game, but it was a Derek Forrest interception that turned the tide in that game. So there was that. There was the game these two teams played this past season, which the Bearcats, you could argue, should have won, and UCF scored 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. So 3 of the last 4 games in this rivalry have been really good, really competitive. It could be that way now going into the Big 12. These two schools have passionate fan bases. They deserve to be in the Big 12. And that's the thing. It's like, yeah, I'm obviously focused on Cincinnati going into the Big 12 Saturday at midnight, but I am happy for UCF because they have a strong athletic program. Orlando is a good market to have in the Big 12. Houston deserves it, and same with BYU. But Cincinnati, that rivalry with UCF. Kansas, I want there to be a rivalry with Kansas. You know, it kind of like the Bengals and Chiefs, where you didn't think it would be this big of a rivalry because the Bengals weren't very good Patrick Mahomes' first 3 years in the league. And then they beat them in the regular season in 2021, but you didn't think they had a prayer at Arrowhead, especially down 21-3, but they won that game. And then they beat him again in the regular season last year and then played a classic in the championship game. Could the Bearcats in Kansas be that way in basketball? You know, the Bearcats have a great history. Kansas, obviously, the more recent history, a national championship, a Final Four in 2018. That could be a really good rivalry, especially when you consider that those two arenas might be the best two arenas in the conference. Allen Fieldhouse is obviously the best for its history and for the present, but then you also think about Fifth Third Arena being recently renovated. Now you got a new head coach in Wes Miller. But we'll continue that conversation when it comes to rivalries in the Big 12. And I also want to touch on rivalries in this city, because I got this really, really intriguing thought over the weekend that I want to share with you. We'll do that next here on Locked On Bearcats. Today's episode of Locked On Bearcats is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over/under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you for making Locked On Bearcats your first listen every day. As of now, I am off 4th of July, but I'll be back on Wednesday, July the 5th. I'm still thinking about doing something because I am unfortunately not able to make the Bearcats Bash on Friday due to work up here in Columbus. But I hope all of you are able to attend, and I'm working on maybe doing something live room, so to speak, when the clock strikes midnight on July 1st. So we'll get to that as today and tomorrow ensue. So looking forward to, of course, the Bearcats officially being members of the Big 12 on Saturday, July 1st at midnight. So I think what's really interesting, and by the way, you know, I value the everyday listener on this show. We all do. Myself here on Locked On Bearcats, and James Rapine and Jake Lisko of Locked On Bengals, Jeff Carr and Stephen Offenmaker from Locked On Reds, all of us here at the Locked On Podcast Network, we value the everyday listener on this show. So we thank you for continually making us your first listen every day. But I want to get to the rivalry conversation, because a Bearcats-Kansas rivalry, while you might think right now Kansas is far and away the better team, I think we all thought that when the Chiefs and Bengals played on January 2nd of 2022. But if you remember that game, which I'm sure you do, and the Chiefs went ahead 14-0, and you're thinking, well, you know, the Chiefs are just that much better than the Bengals. So much for thinking we had a chance. Then all of a sudden, Jamar Chase outruns the entire Chiefs defense for a 72-yard touchdown. I think as you watch that game, and then the Bengals win that game, and I remember feeling this way. I remember asking on Twitter the next week, what says the Bengals can't go into Arrowhead and beat them if they were to play them in the playoffs? Lo and behold, they did. And so I think about how that rivalry formed. And it really formed in the AFC Championship game because the Chiefs finally beat the Bengals. And I think about the Bearcats in Kansas. The first time the Bearcats play Kansas, that game is going to be circled on your calendar. There's no question in my mind it will be. And I say that because Kansas is college basketball's holy grail. Blue blood, Allen Fieldhouse, a lot of history, James Naismith, Fog Allen. There is so much history that resides within that university and school and program. And when they come to Cincinnati, the scene at Fifth Third Arena that night is going to be immaculate. It's going to be incredible. I mean, there's probably going to be students camped outside the arena. Like, this is Power 5 life. And maybe and I'm trying to remember if we had any of this in the Big East days. Now, I'm sure there were, but not like this. This is the Big 12. This is major. This is Power 5. This is, you are in the best conference in the country. Good luck. And this is Kansas. Now, the Big East obviously has a handful of historic programs, or did, and still does. But Kansas, this is Kansas. This is a blue blood. This is the blue blood in the Kansas Jayhawks. And so I think about that, and I think about the settings where both games are going to be played. I think about the fan bases. I think about the head coaches, Wes Miller, young, up-and-coming, Bill Self. By the way, I figured I was thinking about this. Bill Self right now is the only in Division One men's, the only active head coach with 2 national championships. Because think about it, Jay Wright retired; he had 2. There's Dan Hurley only has 1. Scott Drew only has 1. Tony Bennett only has 1. Roy Williams is already retired. Mike Krzyzewski retired. But Kevin Ali's not coaching as far as I know. John Calipari only has 1. And so you think about that and you realize that Bill Self is the only active Division I men's head coach with 2 national championships. That's incredible if you think about it. And Jim Boeheim had only 1, and he just retired. So when I think about that just, it raises the level that this rivalry is going to be at. Now, other rivalries that could form, maybe Baylor, because they've had a lot of success recently. I know they've had some, they've had some struggles in the NCAA tournament the last 2 seasons, but they won in 2021. If UConn were to join the Big 12, I mean, you guys remember it, I'm sure, but the close games and the classics and the memorable moments that were Bearcats UConn, they met in the NCAA tournament in 2011. They had the epic, crazy 4 overtime game in Orlando in the 2016 tournament. They played several close games before UConn moved back to the Big East. And they, again, another great fan base. And considering how great of a program UConn is right now and how much momentum they have coming off that national championship and the dominance that they showed in the tournament, there is a great there's a sense that if they were to join the Big 12, that rivalry could be rekindled on a Power 5 level. If Gonzaga joins, could that be a rivalry? I mean, a transcontinental rivalry. And think about it, Cincinnati and Kansas, I mean, it's Cincinnati. I mean, Lawrence, Kansas is not far away from Kansas City. I think it's like an hour and 10 minutes last time I checked it. So that'd be kind of like Bengals and Chiefs. And what's interesting is, side note, as I'm watching the Reds-Braves series over the weekend, I keep saying to myself, could Reds-Braves be like Bengals-Chiefs? Because think about it. What makes a great rivalry? Obviously close games, but it's great players. Manning-Brady was a great rivalry, but Patriots-Colts was just as good in terms of the team versus team because of the players on both teams. New England, you had guys like Deion Branch, Willie McGinnis, Kevin Falk, Teddy Bruschi, Rodney Harrison, David Givens. I know I'm missing some. Adam Vinatieri, who played on both teams. I'm just thinking back to the great players in that rivalry. On the Colts, obviously Peyton Manning, but I mean, my goodness. Marvin Harrison, Reggie Wayne, Dallas Clark, alone on offense, and then defensively, Dwight Freeney, Robert Mathis, Gary Brackett, Antoine Bethea, Bob Sanders, hell, Cincinnati's, excuse my language, Cincinnati's Rocky Boyman. And so that rivalry was defined by great players. And so I think about the Bearcats. And obviously in college it's different because you have players rotating in and out every few years. With the Reds and Braves, the Braves have done an unbelievable job building that young core. And if you want more on Braves, listen to oh gosh, what are their names? Jake Mastriani, and I forget his co-host, Locked On Braves, but he's fantastic. And then, of course, Locked On Reds, Jeff Carr and Stephen Offenmaker. But what's interesting to me is the Braves have done a great job building their roster with the core of players. The Reds might be able to do the same thing. And that's what makes a great rivalry. Bengals-Chiefs is a great rivalry, obviously because of Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes. But at the same time, there's the other players. There's Jamar Chase. There's Travis Kelce. There's T. Higgins. There's Chris Jones. There's, Tyler Boyd. There's Jermaine Pratt. There's Trey Hendrickson. There's DJ Reader. There's Mike Hilton. There's Juan Thornhill. There's George Karlaftis. And the head coaches, Andy Reid. And so, for me, Jake Mastriani. And then on their postcast, they have Grant McCauley. That's the other host. Grant McCauley and Jake Mastriani. So, good stuff there from Locked On Braves. And anyway, Bengals, and obviously for more on the Bengals, Locked On Bengals with James Rapine and Jake Lisco, and of course, Locked On Chiefs with, and I'm just shouting out people who I'm colleagues with here on the network. Locked On Chiefs, hosted by that would be hosted by Ryan Tracy and Chris Clark. And what's interesting is, I was thinking about it. When the Reds started to get good in the 2010s, their rivalry with the Phillies, two-time defending National League champions, played a lot of close games, great players on both sides. The Phillies, if you don't remember those teams, it was Ryan Howard, Chase Utley, Jimmy Rollins, Shane Victorino, Raul Ibanez, Cliff Lee, Roy Halladay, the late Roy Halladay, God rest his soul. And Locked On Phillies, if you want to check more of that out, of course, you can check out Connor Thomas, hosted of Locked On Phillies. All right. I was thinking about this recently when it comes to streaks. And I mentioned to Lance McAllister when I called into his show on 700 WLW last week, because it changes the lens of how I view something with the Bearcats. I'll explain what that is next here on Locked On Bearcats. All right, so those of you who are my age probably didn't live through this. But from 1990 through 1993, the AFC was won by the Buffalo Bills. And I know what you're about to tell me. Well, frankly, they never won the Super Bowl. And it's true, they never did. I acknowledge that. And it's so interesting. My dad used to always say to me, Buffalo went to 4 straight Super Bowls. But I would say, but they never won any of them. And he goes, but they went to 4 straight. Now, I look back on that now. And at the time, I was viewing it through the lens of, well, the Bengals have been in the playoffs 5 years in a row, but they haven't won a playoff game. So what good does it do to make the playoffs? But now that the Bengals have won a playoff game and much more, and now that the Bearcats have been in the college football playoff, and basketball hopefully will get off the mat as far as going to the second weekend of the tournament, now that that's happened, and I understand how hard it is to get to the Super Bowl and win a playoff game, let alone a playoff game. And I said to myself recently, you go to 4 straight Super Bowls? And there's a great documentary, 30 for 30, The 4 Falls of Buffalo. One of my favorite documentaries. Because you really get an understanding of the appreciation, despite the brutality of losing 4 straight Super Bowls, that the Buffalo Bills have. Guys like Jim Kelly and Thurman Thomas and Scott Norwood and Steve Tasker and Bruce Smith. You know those Bills teams had 8 Hall of Famers, 5 players, and 3 organizational members. Brain trust, if you will. Ralph Wilson, their owner, Bill Polian, their GM, and Marv Levy, their head coach. How many of you would have known that? And it's okay if you didn't, but think about that for a minute. Their head coach, GM, and owner all in the Hall of Fame. And then their 5 players: Jim Kelly, Thurman Thomas, Andre Reed, James Lofton, Bruce Smith. And I think about what they were able to do. Losing the Super Bowl once is hard enough. I'm still not over the Super Bowl loss that the Bengals suffered. For as great as it was that they played in the Super Bowl, for as magical as that season was, and for as magical as last year's ride was until it ended. Losing one Super Bowl is hard enough, but you lose 4 in a row. And here's the thing. 3 times in a row, they lose the Super Bowl and then get back. To be able to go back the next year is impressive. But to do it again and then again, that is incredible resilience. Because you could easily throw in the towel. Buffalo never did. They never did. 4 straight Super Bowls. There are teams who've won back-to-back. New England went to 3 straight just 5 years ago. But 4 straight. 4 straight Super Bowl appearances. It has never been done, and it may never be done again. And again, yes, they did lose all 4. And 3 of those were by double digits. But they still went to 4 straight. They still won 4 straight AFC championships. There are some franchises who have only been in the Super Bowl 1 time from the AFC. Ravens have only been twice. Now, then again, they've only been around since 96. But for a long time, the Chiefs, fun fact, the Chiefs have only been to 4 Super Bowls themselves, given they've won 3. All right. The Chargers have only been to 1 Super Bowl. They won the year after the Bills' 4th straight. Never been back since. In fact, they've only been in the AFC Championship game once. That's how hard it is to win in this league. And there are other franchises who've only been to 1 Super Bowl or less than 4. Buffalo went to 4 straight. You run through the regular season, you get through the playoffs, and it's not like the AFC was bad at the time. They had the Broncos and John Elway. The Raiders were still good. The Dolphins had Dan Marino in his prime. Rivalry with the Bills. You had the Steelers. It was not an easy AFC to run through. You had the Oilers and Warren Moon. You had Joe Montana and the Chiefs. And yet, the Bills still found a way to go 4 in a row. Not easy. And it makes me appreciate the Bearcats going to 9 straight NCAA tournaments, 5 straight bowl games. Because look, we all want them to win a championship, whether it be regional, national, etc. Not etc. National's a pinnacle. But at the same time, when you think about other programs that don't have the success that the Bearcats have had, only 5 of the programs, 9 straight NCAA tournaments. That should say to you how great of a program and how consistent they were. The Bengals going to 5 straight playoffs. I think there were only 3 other teams who did that. No, there were 4. 4 other teams. No, there were 3. Now I think about it. Only 3 other teams did that. New England, Denver, and Green Bay. That's it. Only 3 other teams made the playoffs 5 straight years. See, it's hard. You think that it should be a given, but it's not. And for me, I think about I just think about the mental fortitude, especially when in college, you've got players coming in and going through this revolving door of rotating players. But you understand that you have to mold a team together and guide it through the 4-month stretch of the regular season, and especially in the American, where the margin for error was razor thin, and you still found a way 6 straight years to get into the NCAA tournament. Pretty impressive. And I say that all because of what the Bengals have done, what the Bearcats have done, and it makes me appreciate you go to the Super Bowl 4 straight years. That means you play in the last game of the season 2 teams. I think there were maybe 28 teams or so at the time, or maybe 29. I think there were 29. Because then the Jaguars and Panthers came, and then Houston came in 2002. So when you understand it from that perspective, you appreciate what they were able to do. When you have a great team, resilience, great fan base, it can all lead to, again, it all depends on how you look at it. Yeah, they lost all those 4 Super Bowls, though. They still went to 4 straight. Well, the Bearcats only went to 1 Sweet 16 and 9 straight tournaments. They still went to 9 straight, only 5 other schools did that. Well, the Bengals never won a playoff game in 5 straight years. They were one of only 4 teams to go to the playoffs 5 straight years. Think about that. That's going to do it for me today here on Locked On Bearcats. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm off Tuesday, back on Wednesday. Looking forward to having some great content with you. Have fun at the Bash tomorrow if you're going to Ryan Guy's Brewery. I'm working on maybe doing something tomorrow when the clock strikes midnight and the Bearcats are members of the Big 12. So looking forward to that with all of you. Thanks for making Locked On Bearcats your first listen every day. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm on Twitter, Frankie_Natty, Instagram, AlexFrank9_, and then email Alex3Frank. Sorry, I stuck up on me there. Alex3Frank@gmail.com. Have a great weekend. I'm back on Wednesday. Have a great 4th of July. Please stay safe if you're traveling. I know it's a bunch of chaos all over the country right now, but please stay safe. Hope you get to your destination safe. And, of course, back to wherever you reside, whether that be Cincinnati, the Tri-State, Central Ohio, or beyond. Locked On Bearcats is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Alex Frank for Locked On Bearcats. Have a fantastic rest of your day, weekend, and 4th of July.